Thank you. Coach Brian here with Northwest Elite Spirit, and this is part 2 of Erasing Personal History from a Separate Reality by Carlos Castaneda. And this is going to be a long one because the conversation was long, and I've had a few days to practice this due to trying to edit the prior video and not getting it up right away. So this will be a long one. And in this section, so buckle up. In this section, Carlos is trying to pin down Don Juan's personal history. And it starts off with Carlos asking Don Juan, what did you call your father? Don Juan says, I called him Dad. What did you call your mother? I called her Mom. And Carlos says, what other words did you use to call your mother and father? How did you call them? Don Juan jokingly, golly, you got me there. Let me think. How else did I call them? I called them, hey, Dad. Hey, Mom. And Carlos is getting upset. And he says, these are very serious questions, and it's very important for my work to fill out the forms. So this is something I've ran into as a coach, is that, so Carlos is being coached or taught by Don Juan, yet he's insisting that Don Juan do things Carlos's way. He must adhere to Carlos's way of doing things. And he says, so what were the names of your mother and father? And Don Juan says, don't waste your time with that crap. I don't have any personal history. One day I found out that personal history was no longer necessary for me, and like drinking, I dropped it. And he's trying to tell Carlos that, yeah, this is the way that you do things, but if you want to learn here, you have to drop that history. You've told yourself this is the only way to do things, and you have to drop that. And Carlos isn't getting it. And Carlos says, trying to kind of like guilt Don Juan, you assured me it was all right to ask you questions. And again, that's something you may run into as a coach, is these little ways people try to get back to doing things the way that they do them, maybe trying to guilt you or whatever. And Don Juan says, I don't mind at all. I don't have a personal history. I dropped it when I felt it was no longer necessary. Carlos asks, how can one drop one's personal history? And Don Juan says, first you must have the desire to do it. So like if you want to learn something new, you have to drop the storyline in your head of the way you do things. So if I want to learn something new, the way that I did things before can be a barrier to that. And so I have to drop that story of how I do things. One must first have the desire to drop it, and then one must proceed harmoniously to chop it off little by little. So it may be hard at first to erase your personal history. And one way you can do it is to, with little stress, just start finding little places harmoniously. Find a place here that works fairly easy to erase some personal history. Find a place there that works fairly easily to erase some personal history without any stress. Stress will make you want to stop, and so you find less stressful areas to do it. And Carlos, still being insistent, says, why should anyone have such a desire? Perhaps you should tell me what you mean. Again, pretending that he doesn't know what Don Juan means by dropping one's personal history. And very clearly, as usual, Don Juan says, to do away with it. That's what I mean. Carlos insisting that he doesn't understand, still telling that old story. I must not understand the proposition. Take you, for instance. You are Yaki. You can't change that. Don Juan says, am I? How do you know that? And Carlos says, true, I can't know that with certainty, but you know it, and that's what counts. That's what makes it personal history. Again, trying to force his narrative onto Don Juan. Like, you know it, so that's what makes it personal history. And even though that's like Carlos has a failed framework in life, he admires Don Juan for the way he does things and the power Don Juan has from the way he does things, Carlos is still insisting on his own old framework. The fact that I know whether or not I'm Yaqui or not doesn't make it personal history. Only when someone else knows does it become personal history. And this because if the story isn't told, it isn't enforced by others. And even, like, something can go on in your life, and if you don't cling to it by telling that story over and over again, or if you don't tell it to somebody else and now they're clinging to it and the two of you are clinging it together, you could even forget about it entirely, and then it's gone and you're in the present moment and the history doesn't exist. So if nobody's there to enforce the history, it's not history. It can actually go away and not be on your mind ever again. And I assure you that no one will ever know that for sure. So if you don't tell anybody your history, no one knows for sure if it's history. So if you don't tell anybody you're Yaqui, no, it's not for sure if you're Yaqui or not. You don't know what I am, do you? You'll never know who I am or what I am because I don't have a personal history. Don Juan asked Carlos if he has a father, and Don Juan says, I do. And Don Juan says, your father is an example of what I have in mind. What did your father think of you? Your father knows everything about you, so he has you all figured out. He knows who you are and what you do, and there's no power on earth that can make him change his mind about you. And I am guilty of this. I have been guilty of this with my own kids and with people around me, where I know who they are and I know what they do, and there's no power on earth that could change my mind, even if they do something different. I can see instances where I tried to keep them to their old way of doing things, and I have a very recent scenario of this, even while I was reading this, and this excerpt here exposed me to it. So my daughter and I, we had these phone calls that we had to make. It wasn't like a scheduled phone call. It was only on our schedule because there's some information that we want. And we kept missing, like it's on our board, and we kept not doing it. And one day after a long day's work, I come inside and I'm like, you probably didn't call them today, did you? And I realized I was doing that thing. And she says, no, I called them. But then I was thinking to myself, wow, I just did that thing where nothing on earth could change my assumption that she hadn't called, other than her having actually called. But I came in the door having assumed that she hadn't called, and so I was forcing this storyline on her, and it kind of gave me flashbacks to all the other times in my life that I had done that. And so it was a really powerful instance, and I don't want to go back to doing that again. But also at the same time, it revealed to me, like, all the times I was hit with something like that, where someone was forcing me into this narrative that wasn't true or that I had changed. And so that was powerful. Everybody that knows you has an idea about you, and you keep feeding the idea with everything you do. Don't you see that you must renew your history by telling your relatives, your parents, your friends, everything you've done? And I've done this, and this is why I'm trying new things, because I've been a chronic sharer, like on Facebook, Instagram. I kind of tried to shook it off as just journaling, like in public, basically, because that is what I do. Like I have stacks of journals, and I was using Facebook as a journal, but also as like kind of a way to tell people what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. But on the other hand, if you have no personal history, no explanations are needed, and nobody is disillusioned or angry with you, and nobody pins you down with their thoughts. And so having I've had a little following on Facebook. I had people that would hit me up and said, I'm inspired by your work or the things you do, or if they perceive something that I hadn't done as a failure, they would hit me up and be like, I'm sorry. Or they would feel bad for me, or even for themselves, that I hadn't met a goal according to their expectations. And I find that I don't like that. I can reach my goals and I can reach my own expectations. I don't change the plan, I change the timeline. But if you don't reach a goal within somebody else's perceived timeline for you, there's a lot of outside energy that comes from that, and I'm not keen on that. I don't go in for that. Carlos says, I don't know how we ended up talking about this when all I wanted was some names for my charts. And Carlos knows how they ended up talking about it, but he's being whining and manipulative. He's lying. And Don Juan, of course, calls him out. It's terribly simple. The way we ended up talking about it was because I said to ask questions about one's past is a bunch of crap. So here's another thing that you may run into, or I've ran into with students. He says, there's the idea of not having personal history is something that the Yankees do. And I've seen it in debates and stuff online too, where someone says, well, you don't have the credentials. You didn't go to this school, or you didn't do this sort of learning. So you can't know this thing. And Don Juan says, I learned it during the course of my life. And again, Carlos trying to, in my eyes, minimize Don Juan's teaching. Did your father teach you that? He says, no, let's say I learned it by myself. I'm going to give you a secret so you won't go away empty-handed today, and to write it down if you need to, because Carlos loves to write things down. It's best to erase all personal history, because that would make us free from the encumbering thoughts of others. And it's like I said, having shared a lot on Facebook, that when you inspire others or you attach others to what you have going on, they start piling expectations or their personal feelings on it, and they may even try to steer you, like you'll get recommendations from them, or even from the algorithm, or you'll get suggestions, and they'll start trying to steer you away from what you are getting at and more towards what they think would be best for you. So it says in the book, Carlos says that he is confused, and that that Don Juan is driving him crazy because he admires Don Juan, but at the same time, Don Juan drives him nuts. Don Juan makes him very angry. And I think that is because Carlos is trying to find a way to pin Don Juan down, and he can't. And Carlos can't let go of that idea of, like, he needs to put you in a category and in his notes. And if he can't do that, then he gets frustrated. And Carlos says, take yourself for instance, or Don Juan says, take yourself for instance, because Don Juan picks up on it. Just looking at Carlos, he picks up on it. It says, take yourself for instance. Right now, you don't know whether you're coming or going, and that is so because I erased my personal history. I've little by little created a fog around me in my life, and nobody knows for sure who I am or what I do. Carlos says, but you yourself know who you are, don't you? And Don Juan says, you bet I don't. And so that goes into, like, when I walked into the door and did that, you probably didn't call those people today, did you? Like, though I did stuff like that, I didn't know that about myself until I read this, and it kind of got me thinking about it. And then I look back at my past, and I can see that I was like that I would do that. I would assume, but I didn't know that about myself, so I didn't know myself. Though we may insist that we know ourselves, like we have these things that we do that we have no idea that we do or why we do them. Don Juan says, you bet I don't. That is the little secret I'm going to give you today. Nobody knows my personal history. Nobody knows who I am or what I do. Not even I. How can I know who I am when I am all of this? And so when I think about that, we have this infinite number of things affecting us, like what we ate, the amount of sunshine or darkness or moonlight that we got, the breeze, the sounds around us, the people around us. Like, There's so many things going on around us that affect us that it's hard to know really what is us and what isn't. Little by little, you must create a fog around yourself. You must erase everything around you until nothing can be taken for granted, until nothing any longer is for sure real. Your problem now is that you're too real. Your endeavors are too real. Your moods are too real. You take things for granted. Don't take things so for granted. So like, we take our mood for granted, right? And I can see that where I've done that, where I've been in a mood, and the mood really has come from like not having eaten. So I don't eat, and I can become angry or like sad or like down. And then I eat, and it's fine. So I could be like, well, this is just my mood. This is who I am. This is how I get. But then just something simple as a tiny snack, an apple or, a handful of peanuts, and it's not my mood anymore. So it wasn't just my mood. It's not just who I am. It was that I needed something to eat or whatever it is. Like a simple little thing could change your whole mood, which can change your entire day, which can change your entire week, your entire month, often to your entire life. So not taking things your mood so for granted, and erase yourself, like may not actually be who you are. So don't cling to who I am. We take everything for granted, even ourselves. This is just who I am. This is what I do. This attitude extends out into the world. Those are my personal notes. And Carlos says, what for? About why you erase yourself. You said that you wanted to learn about plants. Do you want to get something for nothing? What do you think this is? We agreed that you would ask me questions and I'd tell you what I know. So, what for? Why would you erase yourself? Well, this attitude of yours is getting in the way of you learning what you've asked me to teach you. So that's what for. And Carlos, and a lot, again, I've ran into it with students. They're like, why should I do that? Why should I do that? Well, you said you wanted to change. You said you wanted to learn something new. So if you want to learn something new, you have to drop this thing that's getting in the way. And if you don't like it, go do something else. And this is Don Juan telling Carlos exactly how to learn about plants, or anything for that matter. We have to do away with what we do and what we don't know in order to see what is. And what is right before our eyes, and often no words are needed. So Don Juan is telling there's nothing really to say about plants. You just have to experience the plants. And to really experience them, you have to do away with all this crap that you have, this barrier that you have in front of it. Carlos says, you're right. And Don Juan says, let's put it this way. If you want to learn about plants, since there's nothing really to say about them, you must, amongst other things, erase your personal history. Carlos asks how. Begin with simple things, such as not revealing what you really do. So like when you're in a conversation, say as little as you can, I guess. Then you must leave everyone who knows you well. That one's hard for me, but though, I don't have a whole lot of people around me right now. This way you'll build up a fog around yourself. Carlos says, but that's absurd. Why shouldn't people know me? What's wrong with that? Don Juan says, what's wrong is that once they know you, you're an affair, take it for granted. And from that moment on, you won't be able to break the tie of their thoughts. So yeah, when people know you, they try to keep you in the box of what they know about you. And they'll start trying to solidify that box with what they think should be done about who you are and what you do, or where you should go in your life, and all these things. And we've all experienced this. The ties of others and the expectations of others, the pull of others, and how people try and hold us to their vision of us, and how we tell them stories to assure that they know we are adhering either to our story or to what they think we should be doing. And we may even lie to them, like, yeah, I'm doing that thing that you think I should be doing. And Don Juan says, I personally like the ultimate freedom of being unknown. No one knows me with a steadfast certainty the way people know you, for instance. Carlos gets kind of, he's feeling criticized. He says, but that would be lying. And Carlos is lying here because he knows that not telling people your personal history and lying to people are two different things. Carlos is smart enough to know that, and he's pretending that he doesn't. Don Juan, in my opinion, Don Juan, I'm not concerned with lies or truths. Lies are lies only if you have personal history. So it's only a lie if you've told somebody a lie, or if you've told somebody one thing and then you do. Because sometimes you tell people when you feel one way, then something happens and you do something different, and that kind of makes the way you said you would handle a situation a lie. But often you don't know how you would handle a situation until it happens, or you'd like to think you would handle things a certain way, and then when it comes up, it's not really the way you said isn't really the best way to do it, or the way that you would do it. I don't like to deliberately mystify people or mislead them. And Don Juan says you mislead people anyway. And Carlos told a lie to Don Juan when they first met. It's what has led to this their relationship. Carlos pretended that he knew more about plants than he did, and Don Juan saw through that. And Don Juan looked at Carlos as though he saw through it, and that fascinated Carlos, and that's why he's come back for more meetings. Don Juan, you always knew how to lie. The only thing that was missing was you didn't know why to do it, and now you do. And Carlos says, don't you see that I'm really sick of people thinking I'm unreliable? And Don Juan says, but you are unreliable. Damn it to hell, man, I'm not. And he is. The only thing Carlos is really reliable to is like his journal and his notes. To other people, he's really not. He's kind of manipulative, and he does lie. Don Juan, when one doesn't have personal history, nothing one says can be taken for a lie. Your trouble is that you have to explain everything you do to everybody compulsively. And at the same time, you want to keep the freshness and the newness of what you do. Well, since you can't be excited after explaining everything that you've done, you lie in order to keep on going. Still thinking about that one. Maybe later on I can do a follow-up on this and see where that's gone for myself. From now on, you must simply show people whatever you care to show them, but without telling them exactly what you do or how you've done it. Carlos says, I can't keep secrets. What you're saying to me is useless. Again, Carlos trying to change the subject and even acting like Don Juan may be a bad person for living like this. You're not keeping secrets. You're just not telling people. Keeping secrets is like a thing where like you close in and you put up a wall. This isn't a wall. This is just living there's more like a wall restricts movement, restricts freedom. Secrets restrict movement and restrict freedom, and you have to defend them. But this is more open and freeing, so there's not really a secret, you're just not revealing things. And he says, I can't keep secrets. And Don Juan says, then change. And change is easier than when we pretend. We can't start off by just trying a new way of doing things. Or we can start off by just trying a new way of doing things, like little attempts. So it doesn't have to be outright change immediately. It can be little by little. You see, we only have two alternatives. We either take everything for sure and real, or we don't. What's real and what isn't? I guess assume even within yourself that it's all pretend, and then test it. So like when I came in the door and said you probably didn't call them, that was me like pretending that the narrative is true and will always be true. And having had that realization, I can the next time not assume that something is what I've always assumed it is, and that'll be a little step towards, this freedom that we're looking at. Assume it's all pretend. So we have two choices. If we follow the first, we end up bored to death with ourselves and with the world. So taking everything at face value or just leaving it as we assume it is boring. There's no real flavor or mystery to it. And though we pretend that it's satisfying, it's not really very satisfying. If we follow the second and erase personal history, we create a fog around us, a very exciting and mysterious state in which nobody knows where the rabbit will pop out, not even ourselves. And that is the truth of it anyway. Like, we don't really know what's going to happen. We just pretend that we do, and I think it's more satisfying to our egos than to our actual personal spirit. Carlos, erasing our personal history will only increase our sensation of insecurity. And so here, Carlos is, he says, our sense of insecurity, trying to force his personal history or viewpoint on everyone else. Won't necessarily increase our sense of insecurity, maybe his, and maybe only at first until he starts realizing that it's not as frightening as he thought. So it may at first increase his own sense of insecurity, yet he cannot know for sure it do that for everyone. He also doesn't know if it gets better with practice, and he is afraid to even practice because of his ego. Don Juan, when nothing is for sure, we remain alert, perennially on our toes. It's more exciting not to know which bush the rabbit is hiding behind, which is true anyway, than to behave as though we know everything, or as to pretend we know which bush the rabbit is behind, which is a lie. So let's see here. My ending note: it's more exciting, and we don't know which. It's more exciting when we don't know which bush the rabbit is hiding behind, which is true anyway. Not knowing is the truth. Pretending to know is the lie. Pretending to know yourself if you haven't shaken off the shackles of others. Pretending to know the people around you even after they astound you by doing something absurd or out of character. And pretending to know which bush the rabbit is behind. This has been Coach Brian with Northwest Elite Spirit. Erasing Personal History Part 2, or whatever I'm going to call it. If you haven't done that yet, hit the subscribe button, like, comment, share, and of course, practice. Thank you.